EGI Stiell was set up here in Glasgow in 1911, and throughout the rest of the 20th century it survived and prospered, finding work in and around the coalfields and the steelworks of Lanarkshire, Scotland's industrial heartland. And the company traded on a fairly straightforward set of electrical engineering skills. So on the face of it, there was nothing that exciting about EGI Stiell. But for the people that worked there, this was a really, really special company.
It was just a great place to work, and everybody, you enjoyed going to your work.
But brotherhood, kind of camaraderie, but this overwhelming kind of feeling of belonging to something.
I think it was probably the best spell in my career, and a lot of my colleagues and the people that worked with me and for me at that time say the same thing.
When you got there, it was a great place to work, great people, dynamic.
We had a blast. I mean, we had an absolute blast building a fantastic business.
I wanted to find out where all this pride and all this passion came from. And I wanted to discover how this business managed to navigate its way through 2 world wars, a Great Depression, and the decline of Scotland's heavy industrial base, to find itself, as the century came to a close, as a shining star in a new market.
In the 2 centuries before Edwin James Stiell was born, Glasgow was transformed from a sleepy town by the Clyde into the second city of the empire. Its merchants grew rich, trading tobacco and textiles around the world. And then its shipbuilders and engineers turned it into an industrial powerhouse. Bill Loch was a director of E.J. Stiell between 1996 and 2002. Along with his wife Jenny, he has been trying to piece together the story of Stiell. Jenny has been building a picture of the Stiell family and the early days of the company. But the information is patchy. She knows that the business was launched in 1911 and named after Edwin James Stiell. She has also researched the Stiell family tree and found various documents and portraits. She has Edwin's birth and death certificates, but there's no sign of any photos.
Edwin James Stiell was born in Edinburgh in 1885, but he grew up in the North Lanarkshire village of Blantyre. His father John was a successful Glasgow leather merchant, as was his father William before him. And Edwin's mother Agnes was also from an entrepreneurial family. Her father was James Swan, a successful mine owner from South Lanarkshire. So business was well and truly in the Stiell blood. By the time Edwin James came along, the Stiell family was already well established and successful. When he was 12, they moved here to Dowen Hill, a leafy suburb in the west end of Glasgow. 4 years later, the 1901 census tells us of a family home with 14 bedrooms and 3 servants. Edwin was educated at Glasgow Academy and then came here to Glasgow University to study electrical engineering. Now today that might not seem like the most obvious choice for the son of a wealthy Glasgow businessman. But I guess what we've got to remember is that back then electricity was the high technology. After leaving university, Edwin did not hang around. In 1911, aged just 26, he set up the business, and its first registered office was here in the Baltic Chambers in the heart of Glasgow. I joined Stiell in 1996, and over the next few years we set about turning Edwin's business into a modern-day facilities management company, looking after buildings for clients like Abbey National and the Clydesdale Bank, both based no more than a stone's throw from where I'm standing today. And it's strange when you think back to these days, we had absolutely no idea that this is where it all started.
At first, the business was listed as electricians and operated in and around Glasgow. But this was soon to change, and Bill is on his way to Coat Bridge to find out more. Edwin spotted an opportunity in the electrification of coal cutting machinery, and within a couple of years had moved the business to the iron borough of Coat Bridge, in the heart of the Scottish coalfield, just a few miles to the east of Glasgow.
So what led Edwin into coal cutting machinery? I think there was some family influence at play. His father was an investor in John Paraffin Young's shale mining operations in West Lothian, and his grandfather, James Swan, owned mines throughout Lanarkshire. I just wonder if they guided Edwin James towards this new opportunity. Edwin found premises here in Church Street in Coat Bridge, and this was to become the company's home for the next 6 decades. The building stood here, it's no longer with us, knocked down for housing in the 70s.
The office in Church Street, it was a bit of a rabbit warren. I went into the office in 1970. And the estimating department was more or less a wooden shack built at first floor level on the back of the building above the workshop.
Just as Edwin was getting set up out here, Europe was on the brink of the Great War. Edwin signed up and served his country as a lieutenant in the Corps of Royal Engineers. But his war came to an end in 1916 when he was wounded and invalided out. Despite Edwin's prolonged absence, the business continued to do well. Of course, the mines were busy supporting the war effort, so there was no shortage of work. But the question that's on my mind is who was running the show whilst Edwin was away? This 1917 document gives us a clue. So it would appear that E.J. Stiell was no one-man band. Edwin had 2 fellow directors, Bill Cullen and David Miller. Bill Cullen was from Glenboig, a village just to the north of Coat Bridge, and like Edwin, he seems to have enjoyed something of a well-to-do upbringing. His father was a spirit merchant, and the 1911 census shows a family home with 10 rooms and 1 servant. David Miller was some 15 years older than Edwin and came very much from the other side of the tracks. He was brought up in a one-room home in a miner's row in the village of Overton, which is just a few miles to the south and east of Coatbridge. But he must have been a very determined young man. He escaped the harsh conditions of his upbringing by taking himself off to night school and becoming an electrical engineer. We don't know how Stiell, Cullen and Miller came together. Did they train together? Did they work somewhere else beforehand? Did the wealthy Stiell and Cullen families know each other? Maybe we'll never know. So what have we found out so far? Well, it would seem that despite his silver spoon background, Edwin was an enterprising and energetic young man. He set up the business not long after leaving university, spotted his opportunity in coal cutting and moved the whole show out here to Coatbridge. And the other really important thing he seems to have done is gather a team around him. And that appears to have been very critical in helping the business survive the really tough times of the First War.
Scotland's returning troops did not find a land fit for heroes. Export markets had been lost to the war effort, and the shipyards lay dormant. The country faced a decade of unemployment, strikes, and social unrest.
Times were clearly tough in the 20s, and like many other businesses, Stiell took work where it could find it. They turned to the construction industry and did jobs like the electrical installations for the new Airdrie Library and the savings bank next door. But as Scotland was fighting its way through the post-war slump, Edwin was battling his own demons. And this was a struggle he was to lose in 1927, aged only 41. Edwin is buried here in Glasgow's necropolis. We don't know why his life came to an end the way that it did. We do know that the Scottish economy was in really bad shape, so maybe the business was struggling. On the other hand, perhaps it was a legacy of his wartime days. Was he a man living a life in pain, or was he perhaps haunted by what he saw and experienced on the battlefields of northern France? What we do know is that Edwin was the end of the line for his branch of the Stiell family in Scotland. He never married and never had any children. And none of his sisters, Martha or Agnes, who are buried here beside him, or Jane, had children either. Indeed, of the three of them, Jane was the only one to ever get married. We don't know quite as much about Edwin's brothers. The tombstone here tells us of Ian, who was living in the Transvaal at the time of his death. And we think the other brothers, William and David, both emigrated to Canada and were still on their trail.
Bill and Jenny have been continuing to search for Stiell family descendants, and they've just struck gold.
Something's happening. There, we can see you.
Morning. Good morning. Yeah, anyway.
If I'm deciphering this properly, you are the son of William and the grandson of David, that'd be right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Edwin apparently was my great uncle.
Yeah.
I don't know much about Edwin. I think that, he got an engineering degree, and I think that speaks to the culture of education that goes back at least to John Stiell.
I guess your grandfather David would have been in his early 20s when he moved to Canada. Have you any sense of what was the driver behind that move?
Well, I don't know. I think I had heard that, his father was a prototypical Scot that was somewhat stern and stingy, and David was encouraged to go out and seek his way in life. So I think he was given a little bit of money, and he immigrated to Canada around 1900. And
it's good to get that kind of, we've now got a sense of the one part of the family where there seems to, which is still carrying the Stiell name. The early death of a founder would floor many businesses, but at Stiell there seems to have been a smooth transition to Bill Cullen. And to me that's another indication of the value of having a strong team at the top. It saw the business through the war, and it was now helping it get past the loss of Edwin. A couple of other things happened at the same time. Ownership of the company transferred 100% to Bill Cullen, and David Miller left the company. Perhaps that's an indication of where allegiances lay amongst the three men.
Markets for Scotland's heavy industries were now under severe pressure. The Scottish economy was in disarray and its coalfields in sharp decline. The company needed a new market, and Bill Cullen was up to the challenge.
Just along the road at Colville's, Scotland's largest steel maker of that time, Sir John Craig was busy rationalising that industry through a series of acquisitions. It was one of the few business success stories of the day, and Bill Cullen latched onto its coattails. He quickly made inroads at Colville's, and by the early 30s, Stiell had men permanently based in their massive steel plants throughout Lanarkshire. It was good business, providing stable and steady income, and as Britain began to rearm, the work began to grow.
As the threat from Hitler's Germany grew, Britain cranked up its war machine. Scotland steelworks went into overdrive, and service companies like Stiell worked flat out to keep them operating. They kept up the pace all the way through the war years. And when hostilities came to an end, the post-war push to rebuild Britain's navy kept Scotland busy well into the 1950s. E.J. Stiell had never had it so good.
By now, Bill Cullen was a man in his late 60s, and it was time to pass the baton. And once again at E.J. Stiell, the transition was smooth. John Kerr had grown up in the business under the guiding hand of Cullen, and he now took responsibility for day-to-day operations, and the older man took a step back to become part-time chairman. So what was Bill Cullen like?
Possibly one of the first gentlemen I ever met. Well, I started in 1964, so I was a first-year apprentice. I remember standing in the workshop in the morning, and I would be asked to go out and wash Mr. Cullen's car. He's probably been brought in early in the morning from Muirhead, and he would go back home at lunchtime. So before he went home, the car was cleaned for him and ready to go.
Tell me a bit about John Kerr.
He's very suave, charismatic. He did come into the office regularly in the morning, probably to see what's been happening the day before, what's on the cards for the following day, and then once that was all sorted out, he would be away doing his networking. He would be dealing with existing customers, but developing new business with potentially new customers.
And what was the business like in these days?
They had strong foremen on the sites,
yeah.
A lot of the big steel works, etc. They would whip the guys into shape and get them working hard, and That's where the money came from. That generated the cash, and there was no real need to sort of do anything different.
By the time John Kerr took up the reins, the post-war boom was fading fast, and overseas competition was rapidly catching up with Scotland's steel industry.
Harold Macmillan's government ploughed money into modernising the steel plants, and John Kerr rode this investment boom. By 1960, the company had over 1,000 men working in the giant Ravenscraig and Gartcosh plants.
Kerr, the consummate salesman, built really strong bonds with Colville's engineers, and at the same time, his band of loyal lieutenants ran the operations in each plant. It was a simple business model, but it worked. And once again, Stiell was benefiting from having a strong team at the top.
Probably third or fourth hand, the story about how we possibly got into Colville's, but William McClelland, who was the chief engineer, he had a problem. There was a cable fault, and he made a few calls to our competitors, eventually got to Stiell's. John Kerr got the message and said, well, we can respond. So this was on a Friday night. Right. So I believe John had to go and rustle up some people from the pubs in Coatbridge that he knew could do the job. And they went to Ravenscraig's site and started working on the job. And John Kerr, being the type of person he wasn't just good at working with clients, but he was good working with the force as well, the workforce. So he decided he would go for fish suppers while the boys were working on this big hole where the cable had blown up. Came back with the fish suppers, and William McClelland appeared, the engineer that had asked him to come and fix this fault. So John, being John, he gives William McClelland his fish supper, and all of a sudden, William McClelland, the boys in the hole, and John were all having a laugh and getting the job done. And after that, I believe William McClelland, the first company he would phone when he had a problem was Stiell's and John Kerr. And I think the relationship grew very, very strong between the two of them.
But by the early 60s, Scotland's steel plants and Britain's wider economy were still losing ground to overseas competition. In response, Harold Wilson's new Labour government launched its national plan. And over the next 8 years, public expenditure rose by an astonishing 900%.
With production levels in the steel plants falling away rapidly, the company once again turned to the construction industry. It found work helping to build the government's new schools, colleges, universities, hospitals and prisons. And it was part of the team here in East Kilbride that was building the brand new National Engineering Laboratory. And it was around this time that a new name began to figure at Stiell. David McCallum joined the business as an apprentice electrician in the Ravenscraig Steelworks and soon rose up through the ranks. By the late 60s, he was running the operational side of the company. And David was a moderniser, the classic professional manager. Strategic planning was in vogue, both in business and in government, and David clearly understood the need for change.
Most of the work was time and line and steelworks, etc. But he brought a chap called Jack Kilcare, who had been an estimator with James Scott, one of our rivals. So that then laid the basis for the commercial success.
I think the first thing for me is this training development, the impact on the business is just phenomenal. Something that probably even David didn't recognise what would come from it. He had the initiative and the focus. You know, it needed something like that. But what actually it gave to the Stiell's business, it differentiated our business from everyone, all our competitors. There was no one could do that. Talk about a guy who was very focused, very business focused, a leader in his own way, you know, very dependable manager, director, leader.
I think the junior engineering programme was probably the best thing ever started. When you look at the business in later years and the number of senior managers and senior positions that were filled with people that came through that, he could have never known how successful it would have been.
It always started with about 9 months to 12 months in the estimating department. You'd then move for 3 to 6 months to the design department, and then from there you went and did 12 months as a contracts manager looking after your own projects before you finished up doing 6 months in what was the surveying department.
Big changes from starting estimating in 1970 to going into the 2000s. I mean, when I started, it was pounds, shillings, and pence. Purchase tax, not VAT. No calculators, no computers. You had a ready reckoner to multiply your figures.
In April 1969, Bill Cullen passed away. He was 81 and the company's chairman till the day he died. Then, barely a year later, the company was rocked again when John Kerr followed him to the grave. He was only 59. These must have been difficult times for the business. But in David McCallum, Stiell once again had a ready-made successor. By now, ownership of the business was spread between the Cullen and the Kerr families, and George Kerr, John's brother, was the company's sales director. And at first George and David were appointed as joint managing directors, which sounds to me like one of these uneasy compromises you sometimes find in family businesses. But it didn't take long for David's real talent to shine through, and soon he was in sole command.
Well, I never knew his name was David until about 6 years into working with him. It was always Mr. McCallum. Yeah. He was certainly a man of integrity. He was certainly a man that believed in training, believed in development, believed in giving the opportunity to the people within the organisation. That was very clear through the junior engineering programme, through the apprenticeship schemes, and through the further training and development that David institutionalised within the Stiell environment.
He liked to identify young talent, give them the opportunity to grow.
David always struck me as a honourable, respectable, business-wise leader, almost a conservative leader who carefully took every step and looked towards growing that business in a very sure-footed and steady way with steady income.
Great qualities, I mean the usual business values of honesty, integrity, but David was also a very disciplined man, and the rigour around business planning was evident from the day I kind of started. David helped shape me as a manager.
Scotland's heavy industries were now in terminal decline. By 1973, fewer than 200 people were employed at Stiell. But as the old industries faded away, new hope was slowly emerging. Electronics and financial services were already shaping the new Scotland.
David McCallum was a steady and conservative businessman, but I get the impression that he understood there was a need for radical action. In 1972, he moved the business here to Bothwell Road in Hamilton, and shortly after that, he launched the company's first 5-year plan. He then went after new business in the burgeoning financial services and electronics sectors. The Clydesdale Bank was already a customer, and very soon other banks and insurance companies followed. And it was the same story in electronics. But David was not only finding new customers and new markets. Stiell was once again doing regular repair and maintenance work with teams of its people based in its customers' premises. And this was to become a key theme for the business for the rest of its life. David also broke new ground by buying businesses, and this gave the company much greater coverage in the south and the east of Scotland, and allowed it to take its first steps into mechanical services. As the 70s gave way to the 80s, the company was once again going from strength to strength. But David McCallum was now driving forward a business that was still owned by the Cullen and the Kerr families, something I'm sure he was not that comfortable with. It took him a while, but in 1985 he managed to address this state of affairs when he succeeded in pushing through a management buyout.
David, sharp businessman, had a focus on what his idea of how the company should look and where we should be in a certain amount of time. And I think there was a situation where he was almost hitting a brick wall. To me, he's the person who's trying to lead the business forward, but there might have been a point of view from the other directors that why do we need to move the business forward? We're doing quite well as it is just now.
Happier with the steady state?
I think they were happy with the status quo.
Yeah.
At that point in time, he decided to put together a management buyout.
And you must have been exciting times. You were part of that buyout yourself.
Yeah, I was very happy to be involved in that, and I think the idea of being a director of the company, estimating design director at that point in time, I can remember the day we came in to announce it, I almost had a tear in my eye.
In many ways, David's buyout marked the end of an era. Anne Borthwick, who was Bill Cullen's daughter, sold her shares as part of the deal, and so ended the Cullen family's 7-decade involvement with the business. But this also saw the conclusion of David McCallum's quiet revolution, his modernisation of E.J. Stiell. I'm beginning to understand why E.J. Stiell lasted as long as it did. The company had really strong leaders, visionary men who could spot an opportunity and drive the company forward in new directions. So many businesses are one-hit wonders. Once their original market goes into decline, they simply fade away. Not E.J. Stiell. But another theme is now beginning to emerge, and it's all about people and their development. David McCallum was a talent spotter, a coach and a trainer. And his junior engineering programme was now beginning to create a really strong platform for the future success of the business. And one of its graduates, a young man called Billy Allen, was about to make his mark. So well, here we are at Glasgow Caledonian University, and this is where you met Billy Allen?
He was a guy who could read people really well, and I always felt he would have been a leader in business in some industry.
He was very, very knowledgeable about the industry, what was going on. You could tell how all the guys respected him, and even this was guys at 40, 45 that they'd been his tradesmen, they'd been his boss.
No, he was driven, he knew where he was going, no, he knew how to get there. He was an entrepreneurial individual, but charismatic, but not overbearing.
Very ambitious, very dynamic, but a real tough taskmaster. One of the key strengths was his ability to spot rising talent within the business, the ability to pick the right people to deliver the right job at the right time. Billy was sent down as a very young man to learn and grasp some of the concepts of the new type of contract which we were running at Beath at the time. From the moment Billy took control, Billy was looking at how he's going to develop the company, and not by developing it by steps and steady, sure-footed way, but by developing it by getting everybody to buy into it and look at the new emerging markets that were happening at the time.
The clients were really happy with him. They all wanted Billy on their contracts because they knew the service he delivered. The people on the sites all respected him, would do the extra mile for him. So an actual commercial contracts person.
I don't think we'd ever made an estimate there. He wasn't too successful, but he had other skills.
And I think the charisma that Billy has comes from an attitude that he's got about commanding the best in others. And I use that phrase carefully, commanding the best, because he gives you the impression that you are one of the best, but I expect you to be giving your best. And that's, for most people, I think, quite infectious.
Billy joined the business as an apprentice electrician in 1976, and by 1990 he had made it all the way to the board as the company's operations director. And shortly after that, he was to be propelled even further. David McCallum had a serious heart attack in 1994, and although he did return to the business for a few years, he'd already made up his mind that it was time to take a step back.
And what he did with E.J. Stiell was he put it on a very solid footing. So it was well respected, it was a well regarded business in the marketplace. I remember starting the business and thinking it was a really, really big business. You know, I was young, I was impressionable, and I thought there was this huge organisation. And it's only when I reflect back now, you realise it was a small, medium-sized enterprise. It was still 100 or 200 people big, but it seemed enormous at that time, and it seemed incredibly professional and very well run.
At that time, I was working here in the West End of Glasgow. I was a management consultant, and Stiell was my largest client. And you'd often find me here burning the midnight oil on their behalf. And I guess like most outsiders, I fully expected that Des Barrett, David's long-term number 2, would be the man to take over. So I was more than a little bit surprised when I heard that Billy Allen had got the job. But then when I stopped and I had a good think about it, I quickly realised that David McCallum had made yet another shrewd decision.
David was astute enough to go around all of his key customers, of which we were one, and to outline to us in advance what his plans were for Stiell's. When he proposed Billy, we had no objection whatsoever.
Well, I suppose if you look from the outside in, the natural successor would have been Des Barrett, who was, at that time, I think it was Deputy Managing Director. But from the inside, when it was quite clear to everyone in the organisation, it was a new driving force.
Des has always been a huge supporter of Billy, and he was instrumental in his training.
Billy and I had a number of informal meetings, and during these informal meetings we were discussing how best we could take the business forward when David retired from the company. And we discussed and agreed a structure for the future business, which would be Billy Allen as the Managing Director. I would continue as the Deputy Managing Director, and we would approach Jim Cooper with the role of Non-Executive Chairman.
There was an awareness that, for example, if you wanted to be a toolmaker, the best apprentice you could get was Anderson Boys. If you wanted to be an electrician, the best apprentice you could get was E.J. Stiell. So there was awareness of the company. And then after talking to Billy and sort of grasping some of the things that were happening in the business, I think the stress that was placed on people, quality of people, training of people, development of people, was quite fascinating. In the context of the change the company was going through in terms of adapting from, let's say, a subcontractor at Ravenscraig to being a player in the support services industry.
Under David McCallum, I learned to be a professional manager, and all the things I said about David, about the discipline and the rigour and all that, I learned all that from David McCallum, undoubtedly. But under Jim Cooper's influence, I learned how to be a businessman. Jim was a different sphere of influence over me, a different network. Jim's background in his most recent time before he joined Stiell's was around corporate finance and banking and acquisitions and mergers and disposals, and something that David or I had never been exposed to.
David McCallum not only nominated Billy Allen to be his successor, he also invited Billy to organise a management buyout. And that transaction was completed in 1995, at which point Billy and his fellow directors Des Barrett and Jim Donald became the major shareholders in the business. After the buyout, the managing director of this business that you've been part of for all your working life, what was in your mind? What was your assessment of where the business was, what you wanted to do with it, where you wanted to take it, what needed to change, what didn't need to change?
What was evident was that The bench strength of the management team wasn't strong enough. Great culture within the business, great people within the business generally, people who were motivated to work very hard on behalf of the company, but the quality of the management team was okay for what the business had been, which was a contracting based business, but to move it forward there was going to have to be changes there. But we started from a great place. We had a great junior engineering programme, and we had a super business that was well run and well organised and well managed. But the first thing was that we had to realise, or to work out rather, was where we were going to take this business.
And the answers to these questions were largely around facilities management and IT networking. How did you arrive at these answers?
It became that. We didn't start knowing that would be the answer. We started knowing that it had to be something that was parallel to what we did. It had to be complement the skill set that we had as a business. So it was always going to be around engineering.
Facilities management is all about managing and maintaining buildings, making sure that they are used effectively and efficiently, maintaining their critical electrical and mechanical systems, keeping them clean and secure, and providing services like catering and reprographics to the people working in them. And as Britain's large corporations turned to outsourcing, a whole new industry grew up providing services like FM. Stiell was at the heart of this.
But what we were doing was actually utilising the existing core skills of Stiell and then putting them into new opportunities.
What Billy did was he then mixed that and he brought half a dozen external experts in, people who actually strengthened the business.
There was a vision immediately. You know, we went from being a very good business to a business that was really going different places, different markets, different products. There was new people came to the business with different skills that we hadn't seen before, marketing skills, communications experts and financial rigour into the business. So the business was really readying itself to develop.
It's relatively easy to work out a plan and a strategy of that nature. Much bigger job to actually take a company that's in one marketplace with one culture and move it into another marketplace with a different culture and grow at the same time. What were the key things that enabled that change, that transition to take place successfully?
The culture had to change, and we embarked on a programme called New Horizons, which again we developed as part of that review of what had to change.
New Horizons was about trying to get all the engineers, because basically it was electricians that we generally employed, to start thinking about the service that they were giving their customers.
New Horizons was the real step change in Stiell's.
It was strategic. How do we put this in the marketplace? How do we differentiate ourselves? Everyone, Billy and all the senior team, realised that this needed to be about the hearts and minds of the people.
Stiell was now growing at 20 to 30% a year, and Billy Allen moved the company here to a new HQ in Tannochside, midway between the original offices in Coatbridge and the facility in Hamilton that had been the company's home for a quarter of a century. And it was now really beginning to make its mark in the FM world, winning new customers like the Clydesdale Bank, Abbey National and the Bank of Scotland.
They always struck me as a very client-focused and customer-focused business who were just exactly what we required at that time.
Through the process, we'd obviously spoken to a number of FM service providers or potential FM service providers, and it was clearly evident that Stiell's were the right business to fit in with the bank's aspirations. They had the right people with the right mentality for delivering the service within the bank.
Generally speaking, within the FM industry, a lot of these larger contractors, larger providers are very almost institutionalised.
Service delivery in the banking industry at that time was very important, both internally and externally with our customers, and Stiell had the ability to deliver what we were looking for.
With Stiell's, we had a different approach altogether. We provided a specification. Stiell sought to exceed and excel at that specification. Stiell's were always very proactive with us. They come up with ideas that we didn't have just by the experience that they had in working in our buildings.
I think the culture that we had and the platform that the business had run about doing a job well, communicating, good people, and that level of enthusiasm within the business, I think that was a major success factor for the business. It allowed us to go into different markets. It allowed us to go in front of big customers and demonstrate that we were energetic and the right people to work with. So I think that had a big part to play in the business.
I guess the Bank of Scotland contract was the next major milestone in the growth and development of the business and facilities management. It seems incredible now looking back that a company the size that Stiell was at the time could win a contract of that scale. Yeah. How did that happen?
I have no idea. It does seem incredible. I mean, that contract was almost the same size as the business.
But it was one of those chance meetings. Gavin Masterton and Billy, one of those dinners that no one likes to go to on a midweek evening. Gavin, from my understanding, was very pro local organisations, particularly Scottish based.
The people that ran the business turned up and presented the business. I think for myself personally, Stiell was very good in that, the people that presented, and Derek Smith was one, when we came over into the business, they were still there. They also came in and didn't rip what we were doing apart. There was much more of an interest in what we did as well, and how we did it. And they were more of a business. There was they used their ears as much as the mouths.
But at the time, you don't know why you've won or who's helped you win that contract. But after the event, it was very clear, Jeff Burdett and the team, that they were saying that the personal approach from us collectively, how we bid it and how we presented it. Jeff, who was then the property director I was coming to work with, is he very much of the view that he could work with that organisation, he could work with that group of individuals.
As well as making strong progress in facilities management, the company was pushing forward with its IT networks business. And Doug Moore, a seasoned IT industry professional, was recruited as its managing director.
Billy had said he wanted a networks business, or at least an IT business, to run side by side with his facilities management business. So we started talking. What happened after that is quite a story in my career, probably the biggest story in my career. Between 1999 and 2006, we grew from a small group of people doing fairly low-level IT work, structured cabling and so on, to a team of over 300 people across the entire UK, turning over something like £50 million a year.
So who were the early customers of the business that got you going?
Our strategy was also to get customers that were close to home, and there's a lot of sense in that from a sales perspective. So North Lanarkshire Council were a highly valued customer to begin with, and then on came Scottish Enterprise, who again we delivered a fairly large contract for them. Moving into the private business after that, into commercial business, we won a big contract at Baillie Gifford, which is a watershed contract.
And you formed a special relationship with Cisco to move the business forward. Tell me a bit more about that.
Well, the Cisco relationship was very important to us. They had closed off their Gold Partner programme in the UK. They had 12 Gold Partners, but because of the relationships I had with them from previous lives, they decided to open up the Gold Partner programme to us again and made us Scotland's only Gold Partner.
So what was it about the business that enabled it to achieve so much success so quickly?
The dynamism of the business. That was one of the key factors, and the dynamism of the business grew out of the people that were actually employed in it and their belief in the business and their willingness to be the best they possibly could. That was the culture in the business.
With Stiell's facilities management and IT businesses both going strong in Scotland, it was time for the company to seek new markets. They turned their gaze south towards London, where the world's major corporations spent huge sums looking after their buildings and demanded the highest levels of service from their FM companies, a challenge that Stiell was more than ready to match.
Well, the contracts with Bank of Scotland and Abbey National had given us a footprint across the UK, but London was always going to have to form part of any strategy. And we identified one of the young management team, Greg Brown, who had all of the skill set required to lead that charge into London.
It was daunting at the start, particularly I hadn't really been in London ever in my life.
Where do you live?
I actually managed to acquire a rental in the City of London, which was great, fantastic property, right bang in the centre at Old Street.
So what approach did you take?
Really just wearing out the shoe leather, getting around as many people as we could find through connections and networks, making a lot of promises to people that we could deliver, and then getting a chance really. Unfortunately we had some good loyal supportive clients such as John Wilson and Larry Hannam at Abbey National, and then very quickly after that we started to win business.
As Stiell entered the new century, it was rapidly becoming the UK's leading independent facilities management company. And, in parallel, the networks business was also going from strength to strength.
By now, the company had changed out of all recognition. A business that used to be dominated by electricians and electrical engineers was now employing facilities managers and IT professionals and space planners, help desk operators, and so on. And they were doing their work in offices and banks and airports, a far cry from the steelworks and the construction sites that the company had operated in for so long. Like the other Stiell leaders before him, Billy Allen built a really strong team around him, and this was now driving the business forward. But there was one key difference between Billy and his predecessors, and that was his encouragement of wide share ownership amongst the Stiell team, to the extent that by now over 50 people who worked at Stiell had shares in the business.
It seemed obvious that if success was being created and wealth was being generated, it seemed absolutely plain to me that those people who'd created that wealth should share in that wealth as well, which is why we implemented the management incentive schemes and why we ended up with, as you say, in excess of 50 people who had shares in the company.
1995 to 2001 was a memorable period of spectacular growth for Stiell. Turnover multiplied 5 times to well over 100 million, and the number of people employed in the company rose from around 400 to well over 1,200. But there was one final twist just around the corner. Late in 2001, Alfred McAlpine plc, a large UK construction firm, came knocking on the door with an offer to acquire the company. They wanted to buy their way into FM, and Stiell was their number one target.
There was an element of courtship through that they got to know the company reasonably well before we got to the point of saying, okay, if you want to make an offer and the shareholders accept it, then fine, we'll see where it goes.
So other than a good price, what else did the deal bring to Stiell?
Access to McAlpine's balance sheet was helpful. We could move and do deals quickly. McAlpine had strong cash resources when they acquired Stiell's. We also had the credibility of having the public company status, so accessing tender lists became quite easy. To go into the really big government-based tenders or the large private sector outsourcing procurement opportunities became easy for us because we had McAlpine behind us. So this perception that we were still the same business, we were still run autonomously from the main businesses that McAlpine had, but this perception that we were now part of this public company with this strong balance sheet and access to deep resources, and it gave us instant credibility for the mega deals that we had been excluded from in the past. And it became the engine of growth for McAlpine. So that legacy existed long after I left in 2004-05. The legacy, which was Stiell's, was still self-evident. It became more than half the McAlpine company.
People mattered at Stiell's. And it got played out in various ways, but people mattered and there was a loyalty.
It was a great place to be. I thoroughly enjoyed, I spent 25 years with the business. It's probably as close to a family business that wasn't a family business that you'll ever get.
I don't think I've ever met anyone who either still doesn't talk about it as being their best place they've ever worked.
Oh no, best period of my life.
It was a unique experience when you look back on it. I think it was a special business, a special environment that didn't just teach you technical skills and business skills, it actually prepared you for life. It gave you a very rounded set of values and skills that prepare you for the future.
It was tough. I would do it again tomorrow.
A group of people that became very good friends, and we still are.
It wasn't just how well we took that business forward. It was about how well everybody within that business got on, and I really miss it.
The development and growth in the people over the years, it was remarkable just how many people reached their potential and beyond. Incredible, just incredible. You pinch yourself sometimes when you think about it, just what we achieved in such a short space of time.
So there we have it. Stiell swallowed up by a much larger organisation, but still going strong. At the start of this film, I had two questions. How did Stiell manage to last so long? And where did all the pride and all the passion come from? The first of these questions is much the easier to answer. Stiell had strong and visionary leaders, men who at critical points in the company's history breathed new life into the business by steering it into new markets and new opportunities. And critically, they built strong teams and invested in talented people. People who then took the vision and the ambition of their leaders and turned them into real success. So what about the pride and the passion? Well, that's a much harder question to answer. When I've been talking to people, I've regularly heard words and phrases like family, camaraderie, team spirit, brotherhood. People certainly loved working at Stiell. Why? Well, here's the thing. There was no magic formula at Stiell. What the business did over the years and over the decades was build a really strong culture around a few simple things. Stiell really looked after its customers. The business had a huge passion for quality workmanship, and it invested in its people. It hugely invested in its people, and then gave them the scope to go on and achieve great things. In everything it did, Stiell wanted to be the best. And people like that. People want to work for companies like that. And during the Billy Allen era, Stiell combined great ambition with a bold sense of adventure. This was the story of a group of fairly straightforward, ordinary individuals from a small business in the west of Scotland who took on the giants in their industry and won. The buzz that you get from being part of that kind of success is exhilarating, and the memories stay with you forever. Stiell was a special business full of special people. This film was for them.